You paid more for that online order last month. Not because the company got greedy, because of a tax nobody asked you to vote on. And the wild part? The CEO of the biggest store on earth admitted it out loud, on the record. This is the story of how one man's obsession with tariffs quietly reached into your pocket, backfired on the biggest companies in America, and started a global chess match with China. It ends with 9 people in black robes doing something nobody saw coming, and billions of dollars up for grabs. No sides, no spin. Just the part they're hoping you don't understand. Let's go. First, the word itself. Tariff. Politicians say it like it's magic. We'll tariff China. Make them pay. It sounds like a punch thrown at a foreign country. But that is not how it works. Not even a little. A tariff is a tax. But it is not paid by China. It is paid by the American company that imports the goods, right there at the border, before anything even reaches a shelf. And what does any company do when its costs go up? It passes them on. To you. Picture something boring. A coffee maker. A store imports it for $40. The government adds a $10 tariff at the border. The store doesn't eat that $10. It quietly moves it onto the price tag. Now you pay $50. You just paid the tariff, and China never touched a cent. So if Americans pay it, why do it at all? That is the whole mystery of this video. Hold that thought, because there actually is a smart reason to use tariffs, and there is a really dumb one. The problem is telling them apart. Here's the honest case for tariffs. Because there is one. Imagine an American factory that pays fair wages. It cannot compete with a foreign factory paying pennies an hour. A tariff makes the imported version more expensive, so the American one gets a fighting chance. Protect the jobs. Protect the industry. On paper, it's smart. The catch? It only works if America still makes the thing. If no one here builds coffee makers anymore, there is no job to protect. You just made everyone pay more for a factory that doesn't exist. And that, right there, is the trap. Now the biggest myth of all, the one that powers the whole tariff obsession. The trade deficit. It sounds like a scoreboard. America buys more than it sells, so America is losing. But think about your grocery store. You have a massive trade deficit with it. You buy food, they buy nothing from you. Are you losing? No. You wanted the food more than the money. That's not losing, that's just trade. So tariffs are a tool that can help, can backfire, and are wildly misunderstood. None of that is new. In fact, America has been fighting about tariffs since before it was even a country. And one of those fights? It literally started a revolution. To see it, we have to go back to a harbor. At night, in 1773, Boston Harbor, a group of colonists sneak onto British ships and dump 300 crates of tea into the sea. The Boston Tea Party. You learn the name in school. But here's what they usually skip. They weren't just mad about tea. They were furious about a tax on imported goods, a tariff imposed on them without their consent. No taxation without representation. That was the spark. The United States was quite literally born out of a revolt against a tax on trade, which makes what happened next deeply ironic. Because the moment America was free, one of the very first laws it passed was a tariff. For over a century, tariffs were how the government made most of its money. There was no income tax yet, so America grew up addicted to them. Tariffs built roads, funded armies, protected young factories. For a while, it genuinely worked. Then came the moment tariffs went from useful tool to historic disaster. 1929. The stock market collapses. The Great Depression begins. Millions lose everything, almost overnight. And a panicked Congress reaches for the one weapon it trusts, build a giant wall of tariffs and force people to buy American. 2 politicians, Smoot and Hawley, pushed through a law raising tariffs on over 20,000 products. The logic sounded perfect. Make foreign goods expensive, save American jobs. Over 1,000 economists signed a public letter begging them to stop. Business leaders warned it would backfire. They passed it anyway. And here is the lesson they forgot, the one at the heart of this whole video. Other countries have tariffs too. When America built its wall, the entire world built walls right back. American farmers and factories suddenly couldn't sell abroad at all. Global trade didn't just dip, it collapsed by two-thirds. Two-thirds. The tariffs meant to cure the depression made it deeper and longer. Today it's taught in universities as one of the most self-destructive economic laws ever passed. The takeaway was carved in stone: in a trade war, everybody loses, nobody wins. Remember that. Because a modern president was about to test it all over again. Quick detour, because this one's too good to skip. In the 1960s, America and Europe got into a fight over, I promise this is real, frozen chicken. America retaliated by slapping a giant tariff on imported light trucks. That tariff is still alive today, 60 years later. It's a huge reason the trucks Americans drive are the way they are. One chicken fight still shaping your driveway. But the real warning shot came in the 1980s, and almost everyone forgets it. Japan started out building America at its own game. Better cars, better electronics, cheaper. American factory towns were furious. Sound familiar? It's the exact same anger 40 years early. And America threatened exactly the same weapon, massive tariffs. But here's what actually happened, and it's the most important lesson in this whole video. Facing those tariffs, Japan didn't start a trade war, it made a deal. Japanese companies started building their factories inside America. Real plants in Ohio, in Kentucky, hiring American workers to build Japanese cars on American soil. The jobs actually came. That's the version that works. Pressure that's targeted, paired with negotiation, aimed at getting companies to actually build here. Not a blanket tax on the entire planet. The 1980s proved tariffs can work as a scalpel. The 1930s proved they destroy as a sledgehammer. Same tool, opposite result. Everything depends on how you swing it. So the real question isn't, are tariffs good or bad? It's, was this a scalpel or a sledgehammer? Keep that in your head. It's the key to everything coming. But first, meet the man who picked up the sledgehammer and called himself a superhero. Trump never hid it. He announced to himself, I am a tariff man. To most presidents, tariffs were a risky last resort tool. To him, they were the entire game plan. Where others saw the 1930 warning label, he saw a superpower. And in 2025, he finally got to aim it at the whole planet at once. What came next was the largest tariff wave in almost 100 years. He branded it a new golden age. A blizzard of tariffs on nearly everyone at once. China, the European Union, Japan, India, even tiny allied nations that pose no threat to anyone. Some products got hit with a 10% tax. Others, 30, 50, even higher. Within hours, trillions of dollars evaporated from the stock market. Trump called it a good start. Wall Street had a full-blown panic. Retirement accounts shrank. Business owners froze, unsure what anything would cost next week. Then, just as fast, some tariffs got paused, delayed, or changed. On. Off. On again. The one guarantee was chaos. But his core argument had a real wound buried inside it. For decades, America bought far more than it sold. Factories closed, whole towns hollowed out. Good jobs vanished, people were angry, and honestly, they had every right to be. Tariffs, he promised, would drag the factories back home. Make America build things again. And to a lot of forgotten towns, that promise was intoxicating. After years of being ignored, here was someone saying, I will fight for you. So let's be clear. This isn't a story about a cartoon villain, it's a story about a real promise, and the very real bill that came due. The bill showed up first in the most innocent place imaginable, the toy aisle, right before the holidays. Almost every toy in America is made overseas. So parents walked in expecting normal prices and walked out paying more for the exact same teddy bear. Multiply that across every store, every product, every family, because the instant those tariffs hit, every company that imports, which is almost all of them, got a brutal shock at the border. Costs jumped overnight on things they'd been buying for years, and no company on planet Earth imports more stuff than the giant we've been teasing since the very first second. Now stay with me, because everything I'm about to show you gets flipped completely upside down later in this video. In February 2026, 9 people in black robes made a single decision that stunned the country and put billions of dollars into play. I will show you exactly what they did, but the setup has to come first, or it won't hit right. So let's talk about how the biggest store on earth got squeezed. Think of the biggest online store you can. Hundreds of millions of products. A massive share of them made overseas and shipped in by the container load every single day. Which means when import taxes exploded, this company wasn't near the blast. It was standing on the bullseye. But here's a layer most people miss. A huge part of that store isn't even the store. It's millions of small independent sellers using it as their shop window. So the tariffs didn't hit one company. They hit millions of tiny businesses at once, all standing under the same giant roof, and every one of them faced the same ugly choice. Option 1. Swallow the tariff and watch your profit disappear. Option 2. Raise your prices and risk losing customers to someone cheaper. For a while, the giant tried to hold prices steady, to look like the hero. But tariffs don't care about your image. The math always wins. So the prices crept up. Quietly, $1 here, $2 there. Never enough to make headlines, just enough that your total, somehow, kept getting bigger. It's the perfect crime, in a way. Nobody sees a tax, they just see stuff costs more now. And then the CEO said the quiet part out loud. In early 2026, the company's own chief executive admitted it plainly. Yes, the tariffs were creeping into prices. Some of the tariff, he said, ends up in some of the items customers buy. Let that land. The head of the biggest store on earth confirmed out loud that YOU were paying the tax, not China. The scoreboard everyone was cheering was pointed the wrong way the whole time. Then it got messy. When some of those tariffs were later ruled illegal, hang on to that, it's the big twist. Customers said, wait, you charged US for a tax that wasn't even valid, so where is our refund? They sued. A class action lawsuit accusing the company of quietly pocketing hundreds of millions in tariff money instead of returning it. That fight is still going as we speak. And remember, this was never about one company. It was happening to almost every business that touches an imported product, which is nearly all of them. So let's zoom out, past the giant, and see who else got caught standing in the crossfire. Start with the American factories. The ones tariffs were supposed to save. Here comes the cruelest irony in the whole story. Most of them import their parts. A factory in Ohio building machines needs steel, chips, and components from abroad. Tariffs made all of those more expensive. So a tax designed to help American manufacturers ended up raising the cost of manufacturing in America. Take a single car. Its parts cross borders dozens of times before it's finished. Engine from here, glass from there, electronics from somewhere else. Every border crossing, another tariff. By the end, an American-built car could cost thousands more to make. Made in America, taxed like an import over and over. Now the small businesses. A giant can negotiate, absorb the hit, and survive. The family shop importing mugs or fabric or bike parts? It has no cushion, no lobbyists, no backup plan. For thousands of them, the tariff wasn't a bold strategy on the news. It was a bill on the desk they simply could not pay. Some just closed. But the harshest blow landed on the farmers. Remember the lesson from 1930? Other countries retaliate, and they aim carefully. When America tariffed China, China tariffed American crops right back, precisely to cause maximum pain. Overnight, soybeans and corn that used to feed a huge Chinese market had nowhere to go. Fields of food left to rot. And here's the part that really stings. China still needed those soybeans. It just bought them from somewhere else. Brazil, Argentina. So the American farmer lost the customer, Brazil gained it, maybe permanently, and China barely noticed. A customer, once lost, doesn't always come back. So the government had to pay farmers tens of billions in emergency aid to cover losses the government's OWN tariffs had caused in the first place. Taxpayer money patching a wound made by taxpayer policy. If that feels like running in a circle, that's because it is one. And when the economists added it all up, study after study reached the same uncomfortable number. American businesses and families paid almost 90% of the tariff cost. 90. The foreign countries they were aimed at barely flinched. The punch was thrown at China and landed squarely on the person who threw it. Now, to be truly fair, it was an ALL loss. A handful of industries genuinely came back. Some factories reopened. Some workers got real jobs that had been gone for years. That's true, and it matters. The honest verdict isn't. Tariffs are evil. Its tariffs are a gamble, and the House usually wins. But while America was busy arguing about prices and farmers, China was quietly making a move that could win the entire war. That's next. First, America's own friends. Europe, Japan, Canada. Allies used to standing on the same side suddenly got hit with tariffs like enemies. Decades of trust cracked in months. And here's the thing about allies. They remember who treated them like rivals when it was convenient. And Europe didn't retaliate randomly. It aimed for symbols. American whiskey, motorcycles, blue jeans, products chosen to hurt specific American regions and specific politicians the most. That's the game inside the game. Retaliation isn't just economics. It's a message, mailed straight to the people in charge. Now the twist nobody planned for. When Chinese goods got too expensive, companies didn't magically move their factories to America. Building a factory takes years and costs a fortune. So they moved to Vietnam, to Mexico, to India. The jobs left China. The tariff worked that far, but they mostly skipped right over the United States and landed next door. It got sneakier. Some Chinese products just took a detour, shipped to a third country, given a new label, then sent on to America, technically dodging the China tariff entirely. The wall had doors everywhere. Because trade is like water. Block it in one place, and it simply flows around. And now the move I promised you. China didn't just tariff back. China controls something America cannot easily live without. Rare earth minerals. The hidden ingredients inside phones, electric cars, fighter jets, wind turbines, almost all modern technology. So China calmly reached for the tap and started to tighten it. A quiet, devastating message, keep pushing, and we choke your technology at the source. In an instant, it wasn't America squeezing China. It was both hands wrapped around each other's throat. And this is the moment the whole world understood the truth. These tariffs were never really about coffee makers, or toys, or soybeans. They were a weapon in a far bigger war, over who controls the technology of the future. The sneakers were just the smoke, and every country on Earth was caught in the crossfire. And then, back home, came the plot twist I've been promising you since the very first minute. Here's something almost everyone missed in the noise. To impose all those tariffs on everyone so fast, Trump used an emergency law. One written for genuine national security crises, not for everyday trade policy. Critics said this isn't an emergency. This is one man rewriting the entire economy by himself, skipping Congress completely. And they took it all the way to the top. February 2026. The Supreme Court. And in a 6-3 decision, they ruled the president overstepped his authority. Those emergency tariffs were illegal. Read that again. The single largest tariff program in modern American history, struck down by the nation's highest court. Just like that. But it wasn't unanimous. 3 justices disagreed, arguing a president needs room to act fast on the world stage. Even the highest court in the land was split on where one man's power should end. And that split? It left a door wide open, because thousands of companies had already PAIA'd those tariffs, billions upon billions of dollars. And if the tax was illegal all along, they wanted every cent back. A stampede of refund claims began, shaping up to be one of the largest tax refund fights the country has ever seen. Untangling it could take years. So did tariffs die that day? Of course not. Within weeks, the administration reached into the drawer, pulled out a completely different law, and brought the tariffs right back, rebuilt on fresh legal ground. starting around 10%, with a stated plan to climb to 15%. The old wall fell in the morning. A new one was rising by the afternoon. It became a game of legal whack-a-mole. Strike one tariff down, another pops right back up under a brand new name and a brand new law. And that, more than anything, tells you what these tariffs were really for all along. Now, before the verdict, I owe you the other half of the truth. Because there absolutely is a way to use tariffs that works. And it looks almost nothing like what we just watched. For the clearest example, look at how one poor country turned itself into a tech superpower, using tariffs like a scalpel. In the 1960s, South Korea was dirt poor, so it protected its baby industries, cars, steel, electronics, behind tariffs. But with three rules that changed everything. 1. It was targeted, only a few key industries. 2. It was temporary, with a clear deadline to grow up. 3. Those companies were forced to become world-class and export or lose the help. It worked spectacularly. Those protected baby companies grew into names you know today, global giants in phones, cars, and chips. Then Korea took the wall down because they didn't need it anymore. That's the scalpel. Protect a young industry, force it to get strong, then open the doors. Targeted. Temporary. With a plan. Now compare that to what we just saw. Attacks on nearly everything, all at once. No clear industry to protect, no deadline, no plan to build, and driven mostly by politics. Same tool, completely opposite execution. Korea used a scalpel and built an empire. The blanket tariff swung a sledgehammer and mostly hit its own people. That is the difference that decides everything. Here's the honest conclusion, and I'll let you make the final call. If you judge these tariffs purely as economics, the scoreboard is mostly red. Higher prices, hurt farmers, angry allies, jobs that mostly went to Vietnam instead of coming home. But if you judge them as politics, as leverage, as a show of raw strength, as a message to millions of voters that someone is finally fighting for them, then they worked almost perfectly. And that's the uncomfortable heart of it. The tariff was never truly a tool to repair the economy. It was a weapon. And the economy was just the battlefield it was swung on. Now step back for a second, because there's a much darker lesson buried in all of this. When two nations get tangled in trade and the balance breaks, it doesn't always stay economic. To see how far it can go, look at the last time the whole world fought over a trade imbalance with China. It ended in an actual war. Rewind to the 1800s. Britain was obsessed with Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. The entire British Empire practically ran on tea. But there was a problem. China didn't want anything Britain was selling. Nothing. So Britain paid in silver, ship after ship of it, slowly draining its own treasury. A trade deficit so massive, it threatened to bankrupt an empire. Sound familiar? It is the exact same panic driving tariffs today. One country buying far more than it sells and absolutely hating it. So Britain found one product China would actually buy. A terrible one. Opium. A highly addictive drug grown in British-controlled India and sold into China by the ton. It worked horribly. Millions of Chinese people became addicted. The silver started flowing back to Britain. The trade deficit flipped. Problem solved for Britain. China's emperor was furious. He banned the drug and dumped tons of it into the sea. If that image rings a bell, yes, it was basically China's own Boston Tea Party. But Britain didn't just shrug and walk away. Britain sent warships over the right to keep selling drugs. That became the Opium War. China, once the richest civilization on Earth, was crushed by modern British gunboats. Forced to open its ports, hand over Hong Kong, and allow the drug trade to continue. It began a period China still calls the Century of Humiliation. A wound so deep it shaped how China sees the West to this very day. Think about that. A trade dispute over tea and a deficit became a war that humiliated a superpower for 100 years. And here is why it matters for everything you just watched. China remembers. Every tariff, every squeeze, every lecture from the West lands on top of that memory. When America says, make China pay, China doesn't just hear an economic threat. It hears an echo of those gunboats. That is the emotional fuel behind its rare earth countermove. This is the part the shouting matches on the news always miss. These fights are never only about money. They are about power, memory, and fear layered over centuries. The Opium War proved a trade imbalance can end in bloodshed. The 1930s proved tariffs can deepen a depression. The 1980s proved pressure can also build factories. History left us every possible lesson. The only real question is which one today's leaders actually choose to learn. Because a trade war has exactly two exits. One leads to a deal, like Japan. The other leads to real conflict, like the Opium War. And right now, nobody is quite sure which door we're walking toward. Which brings us all the way back to that receipt in your hand at the very start. Those extra dollars you paid weren't random. They were the tiny, personal edge of a fight that is centuries deep and planet-wide. You were never just a shopper. You were the smallest piece on the biggest chessboard there is. You, the shopper, the farmer, the small factory, you were the ground the war was actually fought over. So, in fairness to every side, some Americans genuinely got their factories back and are better off today. And the world absolutely learned that the United States will fight dirty for its own interests. Whether all of that was worth the price you paid at the register, that isn't for me to decide. It's for you. So the next time a politician stands on a stage and promises to tax the foreigners and make them pay, you'll know the one secret they're praying you never figure out. In a trade war, the tax almost always comes home. The only real question is whether the fight was worth what it cost you. But if a fight over coffee makers and soybeans could shake the whole planet, wait until you see what happens when the fight is over a single tiny island. One that builds the microchips inside almost everything you own. Because that island might be the real reason the next great war begins. And almost nobody understands why. That's episode 3, and it's probably already sitting right there on your screen. Follow Diary of a Curious Guy. Because the news tells you what happened, we tell you why.